The other big blow to me was I knew the complicated past history. I did not know our history with abuse reporting in the church.
How'd you start learning about that?
Well, part of it was firsthand in my experiences with Kirton McConkie. And then...
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
So I had an incident in my class where it seems like sometimes management or supervisors make it seem like the most effective seminary teachers are the ones that can make students open up and be most vulnerable in class, which can be really problematic. You end up discussing a lot of things in a seminary class. And I remember, I don't know what it was, but we were sharing hard things that Christ has helped us overcome. And a girl raised her hand and started sharing a situation with her parents that sent up all the red flags, like not okay, something like this needs to be reported. And so, like usual, as everyone's leaving the classroom, I'm outside. I pull her aside outside and I'm like, hey, question, thank you for sharing that, right? Have you told anyone else about this? And she said, well, I told my aunt, because what it sounded like was really intense neglect and abuse, right? And so I just let her know, hey, I care about you. Thank you for sharing that. I'm glad your aunt knows. I am required by law to report anything like this. And the girl actually seemed pretty supportive. She was like, I get it. You can report this.
Wait, are LDS seminary teachers in Utah, do they conceptualize themselves as being mandatory reporters? That would surprise me.
No, I don't think they do on large scale. I did because that's what I was a public educator before.
And they are school
Yes,
teachers.
absolutely. And
Okay,
actually adults in
got it.
Utah, adults, period,
Right.
are mandatory reporters.
Okay.
And so
It's not the Mormon Church taught you as a seminary teacher.
No, that was not.
You were a mandatory reporter.
No, in fact,
Yeah.
in fact, I later went into my office and did what I was trained to do, which is to call the church helpline.
Yeah.
So she actually seems pretty supportive. So I just kicked into my educator role. Hey, I've got to report this. Thank you so much, and we're here for you, whatever. And she seemed pretty supportive. Like, yeah, you're fine. Thank you for caring about me and calling it in. And so the thing is, instead of calling DCFS, as all church leaders and employees are programmed to do, I immediately open my phone, and it's my first time having to call the abuse hotline, because we're taught immediately, if anyone says anything like that, to call Kirton McConkie, right? We're not told that it's Kirton McConkie. It's just the abuse helpline, right? But I call them and I report it. And the lawyer on the other side of the line is like, well, thank you so much for calling. It doesn't seem like we'll have I don't think DCFS would have a good enough case to actually open an investigation on this. So don't call it in. And I kind of paused. I was like, so wait, I don't have to call it in? He's like, oh no, don't call it in. And so I'm like, okay. And I hang up and I'm just dumbfounded. I'm like, what do I do? Because literally from the get-go, from the time she raised her hand, I knew that I had to call this. The educator pre-seminary teacher in me is like, I've got to call this in. It's my responsibility. And then I get told by the helpline, don't. So then I'm frantically searching online, okay, who's a mandatory reporter in Utah? And I find out, yes, I absolutely am. Anything the church wants with priest penitent privilege, this is not some penitent person confessing to me.
It's a victim.
This is a victim coming to me.
Yeah.
And so any argument for, oh, you don't have to, doesn't apply here. And I'm like, I'm a flipping mandatory reporter and they're telling me not to report. And so I'm just kind of racked with guilt, because at this point, this was 3 years ago, I'm still very in the boat, I feel very bad going against church authority. So I pull open our emergency response guide for seminaries and institutes. And I'm like, well, I'll go through and see if there's some sort of leeway for me to report this. But what I find in our under the topic abuse in our emergency response guide it says, to protect confidentiality, never, highlighted in red, I didn't highlight that, in red, never discuss specific instances or allegations of abuse except as directed by the helpline or legal area counsel. So I'm like, I literally can never, like, this is supposed to die with me right here. This girl said she's in this situation that I don't want her to have to keep enduring. And then it goes on to say, and it even seems like our policy used to kind of teach teachers to prevent reporting if possible. It says, when it appears that a student might talk to a teacher about a personal or family involvement with abuse, the teacher should first explain that he or she is required to report allegations of all types. I explained that after she had confessed to me, right? I explained, hey, I'm going to have to report this. But this almost seems like preemptively try to get them not to report. But if it even seems like they're going to report to you, you need to hop on and say, hey, whoa, I'm required to report this, and see if that'll stop it. But then it says teachers should never try to assume the role of bishop or branch president. He did ask me to reach out to her bishop and stuff, but a bishop is not a counselor, is not a social worker, is not qualified or trained to handle something like that. It says, do not discuss or report the matter with anyone unless directed to do so by the helpline or legal counsel. Then at the bottom, it says about how we're not supposed to fill out an incident report or take notes or write anything down about this. So I'm looking at this policy and I'm like, okay, I can't write anything. I can't talk to my supervisor. I can't talk to the counselors down the street. This is supposed to stay with me, according to what Kirton McConkie just told me. I eventually couldn't handle that, just my conscience. And so I eventually go and talk to the school counselor and say, this is what she said to me and everything. And the school counselor just looks at me and says, you're going to report this, right? I'm like, well, I don't know if I technically can't. And she's like, you need to report this. She said it to you. And so that empowered me. So I was like, okay, I'm going to report it.
Had you been taught anything about, as a Mormon church educator in high schools, how you should or shouldn't interact with the high school, child psychologists or, counselors to mental health counselors to students? Yeah,
really the only training or the only thing that I knew to do is like, if there was ever a mention of suicidal ideation, I was to basically put class on hold, have someone come cover my class and walk the student to the counselors across the street. Okay. But really, when it comes to that, I had really good relationships with the counselors at the junior high. I was the only teacher. And so I worked really closely on, hey, I've got this student who's struggling. How can I best help them? But I wasn't trained formally on really much other than if it's serious mental health, like self-injury stuff, to use them as a resource by walking them over. Okay.
So this counselor is telling you got to report because it's the law.
Yeah. And I already knew it was. And so I was like, you're right. I'm a mandatory reporter. I'm going to report this. And so I walked up to the building and called DCFS and filed my report. And they said, thanks. And I felt so much better. I felt so relieved. But at the same time, I'm still super Orthodox and feel bad going outside of church authority.
Yeah, you defied church direction.
So I called the hotline back and let them know what I did.
Oops.
Yeah.
What were you thinking?
I was thinking I don't want them to find out I reported it and not tell them. Yeah. So basically I made it sound like with the helpline, the school counselors were involved too, ignoring the fact that I involved the school counselors. But I basically said school counselors were involved too, so we thought it was best to report it. And so the lawyer didn't think much of it. He was like, okay, thanks for letting me know. Bye. Right. But what I didn't realize is that later on, I would find he went back and altered that file. And we can get to that in a second. But fast forward 2 years, a year and a half. But this was actually just this last year. And the nice thing was I knew I was probably on my way out of seminary and institutes when this happened. But I had another incident come up in my class. It was totally separate. There was something that happened in the bathroom where I'm a one-man building, which is a security issue in and of itself, right? Like if I'm in the classroom and students are in the bathroom, right? Like I didn't even know that another student had come in late at that point. And so there's a lot of kind of risks with just being out there on your own too. But I called and reported something. And at the end, this time to their credit, and it might be because they were getting a lot of heat, like you said, but they recommended I report. Granted, the police were already involved in this case. And in between these two instances, I had listened to Heaven's Helpline, the podcast from New Zealand that really just opened that wide open for me, you know? And I realized, and it just resonated so much. I was like, case is way worse, so infinitely worse than what I was asked not to report, have been asked not to report. And it was so unsettling. That was probably one of the big things in kind of unraveling my view of the church. Because even when it's like, okay, the truth claims might not be there, it's like, hey, well, it's a good institution. It does good things. Right. I can still be a part of this. It's my culture.
May not be true, but it's good.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, but then when you hear them offering to pay out victims not to talk about their story, and when you hear about these cover-ups, you're like, maybe it's not that good, you know? And so at the end of this call with Kirton McConkie, they said, okay, you'll report it. Thanks. Do you have any other questions? And I asked this lawyer, and it's a different lawyer than the first time. I asked him, yeah, I have a question. Why was I told not to report when I called in 2-3 years ago? And he just sounded frazzled and was like, well, we always tell you to report. And I've just listened to Heaven's Helpline. I'm like, no, you don't. You don't always tell people to report. That's a huge issue. And so he's like, well, I would have to go and review the file, but I can give you a call back. And I was like, please do. Because honestly, it's something that I've dealt with for years. I'm glad I did the right thing and called it in. But I have felt burdened by this policy that if anyone says something and the helpline tells you not to tell anyone, that you're like bound to secrecy according to your policy. I have felt like so heavy with this over the last few years. So the lawyer eventually calls me back and he's like, well, I reviewed your files and I'm sorry, you must be mistaken because it says that we told you to report.
Ooh.
Yeah. And so he's like, I'm looking at after every call, the person on the other end keeps notes, and it says simply that this girl mentioned something problematic in class and that you called the hotline and we told you to report, and that was it.
See, prior to Resendez, the policy was they destroyed any record of those conversations at the end of the day of that conversation.
Which is a lie, by the way. It's an absolute lie.
Oh.
Yeah. So the thing is, I even found there was something, because I looked up the testimony where you've got a church lawyer in Arizona testifying and saying, hey, we destroy all the documents at the end of the day. We destroy all the records of the calls at the end of the day. And this is, so 2-3 years have passed since the initial call, right? So I can at least see that they are maintaining records after that. So after that person under oath literally says we destroy the records at the end of the day, I have seen some of the records that they keep. And so I tell him, I'm like, okay, then why would I have felt burdened for years over this? Why would I have felt if you guys just told me to report like I wanted to in the first place, why did I feel like I had to go confess to the school counselor? Why did I feel like I had to go down and breach trust with you in order to do what I knew what was morally right? And they're like, well, all we can go off is what we've got in the notes. And the notes say that he told you to report. And so I said, well, because I had read up on some of our rights, I'm like, if you're the attorney representing me, I should have access to any files you have on me. And so I said, would you would you send me the file? I want to see that it says that. And he was really hesitant. And he was like, no, well, I don't know. No one's ever asked that before and all that stuff. And he's like, I'll ask my supervisors about it and get back to you. So eventually, what happened was he ended up doing a Zoom call with me, right? And he did a Zoom call with me, and he went through the file and showed me the original email, right? Showed me the original email. Utah's a one-party consent state when it comes to recording conversations. So I did record the Zoom call, and the conversation, was able to see some of the correspondence that they've kept on me. And it was really kind of enlightening, because whereas he was always very like, oh no, we always tell you to report. And like, I have no idea like why this would be a concern, and like super nice and fluffy. In his emails, it was a lot more just like, this guy's going to be an issue for us. How do we figure this out? Whoa. And yeah. And so they were worried about it, probably worried about something like this.
But talking to you like, oh, you're great.
And it's all just so, we always told you to report. It's no big deal. And I just felt so gaslit, just so like I would not have responded in any of these ways. And this has become like a formative, like I am like, so it got so bad that before I recorded the conversation and saw the email, what happened was I had to sit through a training at work where we went over the abuse response guide. You're supposed to, in your in-services, every year go through every part of the emergency response guide. And so this was all fresh on my mind, because I had just been told, actually, we always told you to report. There's no issue here. And I was so upset. And we have this emergency response guide, and you have to read through the fine print that says, don't tell anyone, don't write anything down, don't file a report, all this stuff. So I brought it up with my faculty, and I was like, why the heck is this our policy? This is not okay. And my faculty actually agreed with me, and they're like, yeah, you should take it up with HR. So I did. While Kirton McConkie was working on all this, and they were pending approval for me to see the file myself, I called, like I said, we have a really sharp HR director right now in seminaries and institutes. And I called her. And when I called her, she was like, well, I can't imagine that this is coincidence. But a few weeks ago, Kirton McConkie called me about potentially changing the policy on abuse in our emergency response guide. So she's like, before I tell you we're going to change anything, let's see what the lawyers come back with. And wouldn't you know, 2 weeks later, just in an email, like no big deal here, but in an email it says updates to emergency response guide on the topics of abuse and like 2 other things, right? And kudos to them. They took what I said and they made a policy change. A lot of those problematic things that I read to you from the old emergency response guide have been shifted now.
Which is great.
Yeah.
But what that means is that for decades and decades and decades, with literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions of students over the years, whenever seminary and institute teachers did find out about abuse happening, when they were mandated reporters in states like Utah, Kirton McConkie time and time again told them not to report.
Yeah,
which kept children in harm's way at the express direction of Kirton McConkie, the church's law firm, and in effect the Mormon Church. Am I wrong?
Oh no, that's exactly it. And so I felt very grateful, because at that point, since I knew I was kind of on my way out of seminary and institutes, I felt liberated to actually say what I think. Because it's just like in church leadership, you always just agree with the people above you, right? That's how you get promoted. That's how you move forward in the church, is just always being in sync with the leaders above you. But at this point, I didn't care. And so I felt very open in raising my concerns with my faculty, and they're like, call HR. So I did. And I'm very grateful that me feeling liberated led to this, because I did confirm he was kind of frantic in his email because I was recording the call, and he opened it up to the top of the file and then had to scroll down to the very first email, which is how I kind of got a view into the entire email stream about me.
It's weird that he was letting you see his screen.
I think they're just not used to this. They're not used to people.
They're not used to any scrutiny.
No.
Or pushback.
No, absolutely not. And so this is the first time I've ever dealt with this. What do I do? And I think they only agreed to let me see them because technically they have the legal responsibility to. And like I was probing, I was asking. And so this was the first time, but he literally opened up the files. You can see the basically giant Excel spreadsheet of it, like this case with this student. And the very bottom email was the first report. And he scrolled down and sure enough, it says, we asked him to report. That doesn't do a lot for me because I literally called the guy back and told him that I reported. But it does suck that they would come back and be like, no, we told you to do the right thing the whole time, you know? But the cool thing about seeing those emails, that text stream, was that I was able to confirm that it was my advocacy that helped make the policy. It was the lawyer that I was working with on this case was the one who emailed, you can see it in those screenshots, that he suggested a policy change. And so I'm grateful that it helped impact a policy change. And I feel like when people actually do speak up and when people actually do say what they feel, when they feel liberated to do that in the church, things change in the church. And I'm glad that I was able to do that.
And was the hardest part maybe of all this seeing how disinterested or even opposed the church is to protecting children who are experiencing abuse?
Yeah, I think that for me was just kind of the linchpin of like, okay, I can say, oh yeah, this is my culture and this is good. I'm contributing to something good all I want. But in the end, if they're not putting children first, I mean, the historical Jesus, I feel like, would have a lot to say about church leadership today. If you look at it, and first of all, historical Jesus, we only know what we can, like, hopefully get from the biblical texts, but he consistently, I feel like our prophets today are less biblical prophets, but more priests, and that kind of dogmatic letter of the law those were always the people who received the most scathing rebukes from the Savior. So